Hi, my name is Dana Delaware Brugman, and I'm a member of Christ the Rock. I've been a member for a couple of years. Many of you may know me from the Women's Bible Study. I'm usually the one who's always the storyteller at the table, sharing many testimonies of how God has miraculously brought me through various trials and tribulations. I have 3 children. My youngest is Hannah, and 2.5 years ago, she came to me and she was complaining of feeling weak and having really severe headaches when she was going up and down the steps. Took her to the pediatrician and they did some lab work and they said to me, you know, her hemoglobin and hematocrit is extremely low. Some of you know that Hannah, from speaking with you, knows that she has sickle cell anemia. So, and sometimes she gets into a crisis mode where she has to go to the hospital. Well, at this time, she wasn't in a crisis mode, so couldn't figure out why. I mean, we took her to the hospital, to her hematologist. They ran some tests on her, they transfused her, and so forth. The next day, when they did her lab work, everything dropped again, and they couldn't figure out what was going on. So they ended up doing a bunch of tests, did a bone marrow biopsy, found out that she progressed from sickle cell anemia to aplastic anemia now. So where her, just in a nutshell, she had a deficiency in her blood cells and further progressed into bone marrow failure. Now your bone marrow is the factory where your blood cells are made. So she was functioning at a 10% capacity pretty much. Eventually became transfusion dependent. Every week we would go to the clinic, get transfused, red blood cells, platelets, and so forth. Right before she turned 16, she started hemorrhaging. We were in the ER actually for her 16th birthday, and she was hemorrhaging, and they couldn't stop the bleeding because her platelets were so low, which is used to help clot the blood. So they brought in all kinds of specialists, and eventually we had to put her in medical menopause at the age of 16. We saw a number of specialists, and they said that Hannah would have to get a bone marrow transplant. So they said the best scenario would be for her, since she has an older brother and sister, for the siblings to be the donor. So her brother was in Washington State at the time, and he did his testing and so forth. When the results came back, he was not a match for Hannah. We had her sister go down to the hospital in Miami, did the testing and so forth. And to our disbelief, she was not a match for Hannah. And having so much history with the Lord, I said I need to buckle my seatbelts because I have a feeling we're going to be on a bumpy ride here. So she was on an international list for a couple of months actually, and we would have some donors that looked, some potential donors that seemed very hopeful, but then it wouldn't pan out. We would, my husband and I, Bruce, we would come often to drive-through prayer almost every Wednesday. And I remember one Wednesday we left, and my dear sister Tara asked, how is it going in finding a donor? And I said to her, I said, you know, sis, looking for this donor is like looking for a needle in a haystack, but God knows where the needle is. And then one day we got a call from the hospital saying they found a donor. It was a 9 out of 10 match. We were like, thank you, Jesus, overjoyed. Having said that, you know, they were preparing Hannah and preparing her with radiation and chemotherapy. My poor Hannah, she lost all of her hair and just the effects of chemo and radiation, not to mention the added stress of being in the midst of COVID. I mean, we were in the thick of COVID at that time. So minus 2 days into, you know, prior to transplant, I get, the nurse actually calls me out into the waiting room. She said the doctor wanted to see me. So he says, we have a situation. I got a call this morning and from the donor's doctor. And he said that the donor cannot proceed. And I said, I hesitated a moment because I felt like someone punched me in my gut. And I said, what do you mean the donor can't proceed? We're minus 2 days out. We've almost pretty much wiped out all of her, cells already. And he says, this has never happened. They cannot tell me why, because of a HIPAA violation. I thought to myself, I said, this can't be happening. This just can't be happening. So he says, this has never happened before. I've been on the phone with half of the country at this point for direction as to what to do, because it's just never happened. So he says, all I can believe is that a higher power is at work here. He says, before he left, he says, we always have a backup plan. You're going to have to step in. And I said, well, I thought I was too old. What is the oldest that you've ever harvested? And he said to me, 46, 47. I said, well, I'm 56. He says, I know, but we don't have any choice. If Hannah stays the way she is, within a month, she'll succumb to infection and die. So we don't even have a choice. We just don't have a choice. So he left. I sat in the waiting room by myself for a while. I broke down crying. I was just uncontrollably crying. And then finally, I got my composure back. And it's like I just had an awareness of the presence of God, that as he just tapped me on my shoulder. And he says, look behind you. And he says, do you not remember? Do you not remember how I've always brought you through? I've never left you. I've never forsaken you. Look behind you. It was just God speaking to me for me to remember all that he had done, all the miracles that I testified about. He just flooded my memory back. And I said, okay, Lord, okay. I have to trust you no matter what the outcome is. They worked me up in 2 days. They gave me injections to start for me to inject myself to start stimulating my own stem cells, and got me on the table in the OR 2 days later. They said, we got enough stem cells, because this was a one-shot deal. Got enough stem cells. They thought everything went very well. So I was in recovery and getting ready to go home. My vitals look fine and everything like that. And so I told them, before I got dressed, I need to use the restroom. So I stood up, and I think the combination of the anesthesia and my drop in volume loss from them taking off so much stem cells, my body couldn't handle it, and my blood pressure started bottoming out. And I became nauseous. I started throwing up, and they didn't want to get me back up because it would drop even further. So I was in the wheelchair, and I was slumped over pretty much, but I was hearing them, and my pressure was about 80s, in the 80s systolic. I'm telling them that I'm slumped over with my eyes closed. I said I need volume. I said, and they said, well, we're calling the anesthesiologist and so forth and this and that. I threw up again. My blood pressure dropped even further. So now I'm in the 70s. I looked down at my hand, and my hand was white as a ghost. I kept saying, I said, I need volume. I'm going to code. Now, being a nurse, I've been on the other side where I've had patients code on me, because they went hypotensive. You either come back, you don't come back, or you come back on a vent. So I kind of knew in my head, I'm playing this in my head. But at the same time, I told my husband, I said, call such and such at Christ the Rock. I said, call one of my sisters. I said, I need deliverance. He says, babe, everyone's praying for you. They know that you're here and so forth. I said, call now. I need deliverance. I think I've prayed every prayer, the prayer of Hezekiah, the prayer of everybody. Lord, give me years. I said, Lord, I did not come this far to not see this child get this transplant. So you have to deliver me. I felt myself slipping under. Finally, I heard the nurses say, we got the anesthesiologist. He said, give that and this and that. I was literally slipping under. And I think my husband said my blood pressure dropped as far as 65/35. And so once they got the fluids in me, I started coming back. They had me transferred to an adult hospital, and they transfused me with a couple of units of blood and so forth to get me out. It's amazing. I started feeling everything that Hannah felt throughout the years, the heart palpitations, the headaches, the shortness of breath, all these things. And I thought, oh my God, all these years she's been dealing with these. You know, I even told my husband, I said, give her anything she wants, because I cannot believe going through life feeling this way. So we weren't sure that the transplant was going to take. So every day when the nurses came in, I would ask, anything yet? No, nothing yet. Anything yet? Nothing yet. And this went on for over a week, probably about 2 weeks or so. And I remember that morning when they came in, I said, anything yet? They said, well, we saw just a little blip. When I heard that, I just knew. I said, that's all I needed to hear. And from then, Hannah started taking off. Her neutrophil just started skyrocketing. You know, Minister Tara came over to me shortly after the transplant and said to me, Dana, do you remember when you said that looking for Hannah's donor was like looking for a needle in a haystack, but only God knew where that needle was? She said, after all you'd been through, here it is that you ended up being the needle all this time. I just knew that was God. It's funny, we joke around today. I said, your numbers look better than mine now. But months later, they did a chirism test to see how much of me was in Hannah. And they said, believe it or not, it's 100% you. That's her. So she looks over to me usually and she says, Mom, you're going to be with me you're running the factory. You're going to be working for me for a long time. So I hope you're encouraged by my testimony, and we can't wait to hear your testimony. So be blessed and have a great day.